And with that, as the world has been reacting to this very takeover at this point, let's quickly take a look at what China has to say. China calls on the US to ensure the personal safety of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. They have said that release them at once, stop toppling the government of Venezuela, and resolve issues through dialogue and negotiation. That is what's being said at this given point. Pranay Upadhyay joining me on the broadcast with more details. Pranay, very good afternoon to you. You know, it almost sounds ironic at this given point that China has to tell the United States to, in fact, resort to dialogue and peaceful conversations to, in fact, come to a middle ground at this point. But what I want to understand from you here is that with this particular attack, or rather this particular takeover of Venezuela by the United States, we need to understand the Chinese vision of gaining control over Latin America. There's already an extension of a belt road that was taking place, and with this capture, that also does get impacted. And I'm looking beyond the trade and the oil infrastructure. Looking beyond that as well, China will be affected with this very capture.
Absolutely, sir. If you see, Shreya, here, that China has reasons to be concerned about the situation in Venezuela because they have a huge investment there. With the exit of US from the Venezuelan territory in 1999, thereafter China is the biggest gainer of that territory, and the Chinese, be it the Chinese National Petrochemical Corporation or the Chinese Concord Resources or the Sinopec or CNOOOC. These are the big companies which have huge investment in China, and in fact, just before this military operation carried out by the U.S. forces in Venezuela, the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro had a meeting with the special envoy of Chinese President Xi Jinping in Caracas. So China has reasons to be concerned about their investment as well and the future course of the Venezuelan politics if that is being controlled by the United States. And in fact, the way President Donald Trump indicated that he is pursuing Monroe Doctrine, or rather now he has recoined it to Monroe Doctrine, in which the U.S. influence, they consider the Latin America as a sphere of their influence. So U.S. Is pursuing a policy where China has concern. But we have to see that, beyond issuing this statement, what else Beijing would like to pursue, because we have seen in the past, this is not for the first time U.S. Is trying a head of state, because we have seen in the case of Panama in 1989 when Emmanuel Norigo was tried in U.S. And in fact, as recent as in 2022, when Juan Hernandez of Honduras was tried in U.S. court, and ironically, Shreya, U.S. President Donald Trump has pardoned Hernandez in 2025, in November 2025, because he was sentenced for almost 40 years in prison on similar charges on which now President Nicolas Maduro will be tried.
Absolutely, Pranay, and that is what I think we are awaiting to see. How we've looked at all the reaction that's coming in from the world, but how does countries like China and Russia, what steps do they take next is what our eyes are on.